All right, everyone, let's get started. Right. All right. So the workshop this afternoon and tomorrow is about promises, which you're going to be using for the rest of your JavaScript career, however long that lasts. I mean, JavaScript's not going to be around forever, right? Something will take its place. But possibly even after that, you will still be using promises, because promises represent something kind of important conceptually. They represent data that we don't have yet, but know that we're going to. So we're going to talk about the mechanics of promises in a little bit, but first, let's review a little. What is a callback? Just ask that. What is it?
Function called inside another function.
It's a function passed to another function to get called at some point. And so it comes in sort of two flavors, or we can divide its uses into two categories. A blocking use, where our callback is guaranteed to be called before the function that we pass it to returns. And non-blocking use, where that is not guaranteed. So calling these blocking and non-blocking is like maybe it's a little bit misleading, because it's not like they are different kinds of functions. It's not like you can tell one from the other by looking at anything particular about the function. It's just how the function that we give our callback to decides to use it. So some like blocking, or maybe synchronous is a better term, synchronous callbacks are basically all of the array methods. Anything where we would expect our callback to be called all of the times it's going to be called before the higher order function returns. So before like filter returns, it's going to call our filter on every element. Likewise, sort and map with their comparator and their transform. Non-blocking or asynchronous callbacks are the sorts of use cases where we're handling an event, or receiving data, or processing data in some sense. So all of our express handlers are async callbacks. All of our file system operations in Node use for classical callbacks. And then event handlers. That's a weird event handler. I guess that's a jQuery event handler. But in but just like classic browser event handlers are also async callbacks. They get called at some point after fs.readFile or button.on or app.use return. And sometimes they get called multiple times after that. So like an event handler will get called whenever that event occurs until you detach it. Okay, so these are, let's say we want to get some data out of a vanilla async function. So it's like we've got our fs read file, and we have the data inside, and we want to get the data out. So how do we do that? And we've made a simpler example. We're just trying to, like, after this timer goes off, we're trying to pluck some data out. Is this code going to work? It'll allow them to find. Okay, sure. What if I changed that? I should change that to like a let. No. That actually, I think making it a let will reveal the error. So you're right that if I run this, it'll print undefined. Yeah.
What does let do? Like, what's the difference?
Yeah, so the difference in this case is kind of subtle, but if you try and read a variable before it's assigned, it will throw an exception rather than being undefined. And so the problem here is that even though we're calling set timeout with timeout of 0, that is still going to happen after the call stack clears. So it's going to happen after everything, like all of the rest of the code has run and all of the functions have returned, then the timer goes off. The timer can't go off in the middle of JavaScript running, which is just how JavaScript works. While you're processing one event, it's not going to start processing another one. You never have to worry about another line of JavaScript code running in between two of yours. It's not possible. You look very skeptical.
Yeah, I'm just confused because I typed in my node and it worked. But
Did you type it in to the REPL? Or did you?
no, I used my node.
And it worked? What if you do set timeout like 1 or something?
Results are already declared, so I have to
Is it that it should try and do the console log before it's set up? Is that what?
Yeah, it would be. It's like very surprising if the opposite happens. We can give it a shot though. This is worth looking into, I think. Okay. Okay, so let result equal let result, and then set timeout. Result is hello, and do that in 0 seconds, and then log the result. Yeah, so that's getting undefined. I'm getting undefined with that. Which I am a little bit surprised it didn't throw, but maybe not as surprised as I could be, because this assignment we have sort of traversed this assignment. Maybe I don't understand the temporal dead zone protection as well as I hoped I did. Is that what you mean by it worked rather than?
At this point, do you feel that when you console log result and use undefined not high?
Yeah.
I thought high, and you could leave that on the different thing to after the function will return fully false. So that's in this condition. But if you want to node, you want because it will not be returned. So you got rid of line 1, right?
If I got rid of line 1, it'll be undefined always. Yeah, result is not defined. Yeah, you need something declaring it. But yeah, basically this doesn't work, even though it kind of seems like it should, because it's a timer. It's like a 0-second timer. But the timer still runs, like the timer is immediately available to run, but it does not run until after everything has, after the call stack is cleared. So this is a no-go. Okay, what if I do this? This might work?
Why just give you an error saying that result? Oh no.
Okay, let's just try it. I've got it up here. Oh yeah, definitely. This can be much bigger. Okay, so we're gonna say let result is this, the result of this timeout function where we're, this function is going to return hello. Remember that if I omit the curly brackets, arrow functions return whatever expressions on the right-hand side, and then I'm gonna return it. I'm gonna log it. Okay, so who thinks this will work? Who thinks it'll be undefined? Who thinks it'll be something else? What do you think it'll be? Okay.
Is that the same as undefined?
No. Who thinks it'll be the number 1? I think it'll be the number 1. Oh no, it's drat. Okay, fine. It used to be that I mean, the JavaScript spec is, it lets the implementation pick what a timer handle looks like. They used to just be numbers. Now I guess they're much more complex than numbers. Anyway, setTimeout returns a handle on the timer so that I can later call cancel timeout. No, what is it? Clear timeout with result. And now this timeout is cleared. Basically, whatever this callback is returning is swallowed by setTimeout. As in fact it must be, right? Because if I had said anything other than 0, like 13 or 1, now that result is not ready by the time I'm returning, and so what could setTimeout possibly return for me? Like, nothing. It would be very strange to have very special behavior on the part of setTimeout. Okay, so if we want to get data out, we kind of don't have a lot of great options, right? Like any data that like happens in here, basically we have to pass in another callback, right? I mean, in the case of just like logging something when the timer goes off, obviously I can do this. But if I want to get data out of an asynchronous operation, I myself have to write something that takes a callback. It just has to be callbacks all the way down. So it's like I could do something like, what would this even look like? I guess we would want to be, say hi to func set timeout. So func of hello. And so this is in callback land with no other JS devices. This is sort of how we have to like maneuver data around. Here, I find it helpful to think of the callback as like one end of a pipe, which is connected on the other end to really to the closure wherever this callback is defined. So when I call the function, it's like I'm piping data into it. And so now when I run that, this will actually get hello out. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so setTimeout function. Is that easier to understand? Yes, and then. In the creation phase of what exactly? Like setTimeout. Oh yeah, so what does setTimeout actually do? It goes and creates this timer struct that Node helpfully returns to us, and adds this timer to a list of timers. And then once everything has returned, I wish I could sort of write a nice demo of this on the fly, but I don't know that module very well. Once everything has returned, so like once we get to the end of this like current sequence of code, and if we're inside a function, once we've returned from that, basically once we've returned from everything, then then the event loop ticks over, is the term, and Node is like, okay, have any of my timers gone off? And the answer is yes, this timer went off like as soon as I pushed it. And so now it'll add that callback to the queue of events to call, of callbacks to call. Yeah.
Callback that includes set timeout to a variable, then when you call that variable and pass in console log.
So here, this is. Yeah. So I'm. What did I do? No, I did something wrong.
Oh,
So timeout 0. Close that friend. There we go.
so you're able to kind of not exactly pull information out of an async function, you are able to manipulate a little bit by
That is pulling data out of an async function. That's the way you have to do it, is by basically having that function call another function.
okay.
Yeah. What was I going to look up? Looper. No. Loop. Loop, this one. Oh yeah, wait, did you watch this? This was one of the pre-reviews, right? So let's just look at the set timeout thing. So when I, so when I run this, I've just got a set timeout and it's going to console log inside there. In the setup phase, so we call set timeout, and then this timeout is in some timer table, and then when it goes off, the callback I specified gets added to the queue and then gets run on the next tick. I don't know why it's still in there. I have to... No, it did, but why is it still in there? That seems like a bug. No. It's possible this thing has some bugs. So we can watch that again. Yeah, once it goes on the stack, it should not be in the queue anymore. That's the interplay. Everything is a little bit broken. Yeah.
I understand why mine is working, but know that you want to make sure that that's right. Because I did what results there. Then I did set timeout there.
Oh,
That happened.
so you were doing it at the REPL.
Oh, no, in the REPL it was a new show where it's
Okay.
that it didn't come on that day.
The REPL is the command line that you type into.
Yeah, you were doing it in the right?
Correct.
Oh, sorry. When I say the REPL, I mean this thing where I can type into Node and get... There's also REPL.io or something. I never mean REPL.io. I hate that name. Yeah. Every time someone puts me in front of that site, I'm like,
So the node REPL.
Yeah, the node read eval print loop.
When I do let result, I ran that. When I do set timeout result equals high and set timeout 0, I run that.
Yeah, so
That
then,
happens.
so what's happened is after you run the second thing, the call stack is cleared, and the timer goes off, and so now result is assigned.
So now result is
Yeah, so you're basically adding asynchrony to something that wouldn't be
It
asynchronous.
all
Yeah,
at the same time.
yeah, which is something to know about using the REPL. It's useful sometimes, right? If I just want to like read the content of some file, I can like. I guess I could use the synchronous operation, but I could also say read file like asynchronously users ashi.bash profile, and then say like data profile equals that toString. So now it's just going to be defined. Even though, so it's like, you wouldn't actually want to move data around like this in a program because here, in the REPL, I know that this has happened already, and if it hasn't happened already, I can just like tell, right? It'll just be undefined, and that's okay. In an actual program, you have no way of knowing when this operation completes except when this callback gets called. Does that make sense? Yeah, right. Yeah, it's not going to work exactly the same way. Yeah. I saw another hand. Okay. All right. Okay, so this is kind of unfortunate, right? And in particular, it's unfortunate if we want to have a lot of, if we have like many layers of asynchronous operations, right? Like we end up, if I want to like read a file, read file, how about this file? And then say I want to, what's another thing I could want to do? I guess maybe I want to transform it, string that to uppercase, and then I want to write this again, or an example of another operation. Sure, I'll write it, right? Write to file name. So here I'm saying read this source file, write it to this .upcase, and then once that's done, I want to print OK. So this is okay. It's not the most readable. Like we have this expectation that, like, first of all, operations go from the top to, like, we can read a program from the top to the bottom, and it sort of reads like a set of instructions. And this is looking more like it reads like a set of instructions on how to compile a set of instructions in order so that you may eventually know how to do the thing, right? It's like, it's weird. It's a little bit weird. And then imagine if okay, so does this even work? Yeah, it does work. Yay. Wow, it looks like Fortran now. But then say I wanted to make this thing a function, right? I want to say, like, this is, okay, uppercase file with this file name. And then the output will be file name .upcase by default. Now I have even more work to do, right? Because I need to, okay, if I want to do something after I've uppercased this file, like say I want to like uppercase 100 files and then know when they're all done, I have to have this take a callback and then call that callback in here, and then I still haven't dealt with error handling, which would add another case to each of these. And I'm not even going to, because I already see eyes glazing over and it's only going to get worse. So this is basically, the term for this is callback hell. There we go. Okay, so what can we do about this? Any ideas before I like give you the answer, which you kind of already know because it's the title of the upcoming workshop? Yeah, that's great. What's a promise? Kind of. Yes, that's like 70% of it, I think. Yeah.
It's like an empty variable that it like waits until the call type can be cleared out and then it gets filled in and then
Yeah, it's I think of them as sort of like Schrodinger's boxes a little bit, especially because you cannot, like, according to the promise spec, you cannot like introspect on a promise. Actually, wait, let's get on the same page and be like, what are we talking about? Okay, So this is hell. Let's look at heaven. And let's do it in a promisey way. So there's so all of the node functions, like for example, all of the functions in the FS module are not promisified, but there is a promissify function in util. So if I call that on a non-promise function, it gives me a function that returns promises, which is great because I can say like, okay, read file. I'm going to call it read file async, just because I need to give it a name that's not read file. Is fs yeah?
Why are you putting it in the curly brackets? Because I saw that in documentation for like the workshop with client, like client curly brackets.
Yeah, so this is the same as doing this. So these are equivalent, but this is just shorter.
Yeah.
But arguably harder to understand. Certainly if you aren't like super familiar with destructuring, it's harder to understand. So I wouldn't necessarily say this is guaranteed to be more readable, but it is like, it is a little more terse. It's also something you'll see a lot, so I'm trying to show you that pattern. It's also very similar to how certain import statements will look in the future. Okay, so I promise. Okay. Okay, so we can get a version of read file that returns promises, like so. This is not something you'll have to do super often, but will be sometimes, so it's good to know. And now, instead of passing a callback into read file async, we have something that's going to return a value. So I can call read file async, and I'm going to read this current file, and let's just log what that value is. I'm also given up on the slides, I think. Okay, so it says hello and it says promise pending. Let's comment out our say hi for the moment. Okay, so now instead of taking a callback, read file async returns a promise. We still can't quite use it directly because promises aren't magic. We'll look at async and await in a second, and those kind of are magic. They are new parts of the language that use promises to give us back sort of a linear set of instructions that look like something a sensible person might write. But for now, in order to get the value out of a promise, you have to call .then off of it. And you give it a function which will get called with the value the promise resolved to, which in this case is a buffer, because that's what read file gives us. If we want to make it a string so it looks reasonable, we could maybe write a little function here that says log buff.toString. Don't worry too much about how it's implemented. There is a workshop we'll hit later where you write your own promise library. It is writable. It is something that you can write in pure JavaScript. There's no magic but for programming. And I can give you a hint that, like, we know one thing about this promise object, and that's it has a .then method, and that .then method takes the callback that you would have passed into the function to begin with. And so it's kind of just doing the syntactic rewiring. It's like instead of having to pass in the callback immediately, you can pass it in at some later time. And what the promise does is it holds on to the value until then. So there are a few neat features of promises. One is that you can .then off of them as many times as you want. What's that? Oh yeah, you can, so basically this promise represents the value, the result of this operation of reading this file. Let's actually pick a, here, one second. Create a promise-fied version of fsread file. This is read the file, eventually store the value in a promise, and then print the content when available. Oh, and let's do this. We'll do buff.length. But it's print the number of bytes in the file. So we see the file, and then we also see how many bytes are in the file. And this only read the file once. It read the file, it put it into this box, and when that data was put into the box, both of these callbacks were called, one after another, in the order they were attached. Yeah?
What if inside the function that's in the on line 39,
Mm-hmm.
call a promise method?
You can, but actually you probably wouldn't, because you can do something better, and that is you can return. So let's say I want to, I don't know, let's say I want to print it uppercased. This is maybe like not a great example because it doesn't have to be asynchronous, but I can return something here, buff.toString to uppercase. And then I can .then off of it again. So the .then method of a promise returns a promise, which will resolve with the value that I return from in here. So when you see a .then, think of it kind of like a pipeline, where the value comes from here, goes in here, and then whatever is returned goes in here, uppercase, and then I can just be like console log uppercase. Although I could also just say, in fact, I could do that, or I could just say then console log, which is the same thing. Yeah?
Can you give an example of like a real life thing where we would use a promise that would be like, you know, like tied down to another promise?
Yeah, totally.
Because right now it's like very abstract, and I'm trying to understand like how we would use it, and like is it like a good practice to?
Yeah, it's definitely good practice to like use promises, to chain promises like this when you need to. Let me think of an example of like an operation that's asynchronous here. So this, first of all, is going to give me the uppercase version. Let's see. Is there something on my hard drive that I can like load? So one use case is when I like need to load a resource, and then load another resource based on what that tells me. So it's like your browser is doing this on some level. It loads the HTML file, and then it loads all of the things that are referenced in the HTML file. And it depends on the first asynchronous operation for all the subsequent asynchronous operations. Yeah.
I just mentioned this last one, so then does it run when it's 47 or 48 because you like augmented kind of like what it's doing like those two statements?
It certainly should, but you're right that I don't see it. Oh, it just happened earlier. Yeah.
Did you do that because you changed the thens together?
Yeah, it's, let's see. Yeah, I think each dot then introduces one tick of latency. So yeah, exactly. Actually, this dot then runs but doesn't print anything. Here, we can verify that. The log. A promise resolved. Yeah. So I would expect to see a promise resolved here, and then the number of bytes, and then this. So for example, one way we could use this promise chaining is to do the operation we were doing before, right? Where we write an uppercase version of the file. So I could first let me get a promisified write file. Yep, and then uppercase file. So this is going to take a file and write to file.upcase, and then, but we're going to do this promisified, which will probably make it easier. So I can read this file, and then I get a buffer. I'm going to uppercase that buffer. And then I'm going to write it. So return write file async to output. And now if I want to apply this to a file and then say I've done that, it's much, much easier. I can say upcase some file asynchronously. It'll be my bash profile. And then say, oops, done. Oops. Timers is no longer a good name for this file, is it? So, ooh, it failed. Oh, this is another nice thing about promises. Now error handling is a little bit easier for us because when an error occurs somewhere in the promise chain, the entire promise chain rejects, and I'm able to catch errors as they bubble up. So this .catch will catch errors that occur in any of these steps. I'm going to comment some of this out. Okay, so what's the problem? Users. Calling an asynchronous function without a callback is deprecated. Oh, I need to give it string. Done. So anticlimactic. But if we look at my bash profile dot uppercase, there it is, and there it is. Okay, I know you have questions.
I'm not really understanding, like, at what point is this, like, can you scroll up a little bit where you, like, call promisify?
Yeah.
Like, what are you, so write file async, that's assigned to promisify fs write file. What's fs write file? Like,
It's the function in the FS module that writes a file.
Is it blocking?
so
It's not blocking. It's async. It takes a callback. So what Promisify does is it takes a function that takes a callback, like a node style callback, and returns a function that returns a promise rather than taking a callback. And it sort of transforms one into another. Yeah, so the Promisify function in Node's util module takes a function that accepts a node style callback, so like fs.readFile or fs.writeFile, and returns a function that does the same thing, but it returns a promise instead of taking a callback. Those are basically the two biggest ways you can represent a single asynchronous operation in JavaScript. You can take a callback, or you can return a promise.
So they are using two different promises, like offset in two different promises.
We're
Updates by async and down.
Yeah, we're actually, I mean, there's actually a bunch of promises when we call this. So like, this returns a promise, and then we dot then off that promise, which returns another promise, and then we dot then off of that, and so that's this promise, and then we dot then off of that, so that's this promise, and then we dot catch, which also returns a promise, so it's like 6 promises
So
getting
how the
chained
first-
together.
How
Yeah.
the first function promise get changed to the next one?
So how does this get chained to this?
No, how the written write file async get changed to the uppercase file async, like when you're the next function.
Sorry, so how does, so it's,
No, not sorry. Second is the call.
yeah, so the first thing that happens is read file, which returns a promise, and we're calling dot then on that promise. This is just a way of writing this, right? It's just like, I'm adding some white space.
The promise takes a function when you call that then on it. Dot then on it.
Yeah, so dot then takes a callback. Dot then is basically a promise lets you, instead of putting the callback in the call to the initial function, it lets you attach it later in a dot then. That's the big win. Well, the big win from that is that you've sort of decoupled the operation from what you do with the result of the operation, which is nice, right? Because it means that I can write, we're sort of getting back functional composition. I can write something that, like, here's my function that just like upcases a single file, and then I can take data from that. Maybe it would make more sense if this returned the uppercased content. So I could actually be like, return, well, I won't do that. And then compose it in sort of more like the way we're used to. Is it 6? Oh, it's 6:01. Okay. I really wanted to talk about async 08.
So sorry, just to clarify, the callback function that was initially on it is what you actually got there.
Sort of. The thing is, dot then, the callback that gets passed to dot then only accepts data in the successful case. There's another callback that you attach with dot catch, which accepts errors. So node style callbacks get the error and the data in the same callback. Promises split them.
Okay.
And errors have this special case that if an error occurs anywhere, it bubbles until it finds a dot cache, which is really totally the behavior we want, because you don't want to have to handle the error at every step. You sort of want to be able to say at the very end, catch any error that's happened and do something, or near the end. All right, we can talk about this a little bit more tomorrow. Also, you can look at the, we'll start the workshop tomorrow morning, and you'll probably get better questions, or more confused than this. I wish I had a good punny come back to that. I don't. Oh, just you wait. There we go. Okay, I'll throw this live code. I'll clean this up and then put it in the library.
No, it's a great question. Okay, this is and everything else is oh god. Oh god. Yeah. I'm sure you want to do something else. Yeah. I'm literally lost on anything else. Oh god.
I just refound my file.
Yeah, I can.
Here's my note. All times from callback to that's all I got.
Yeah.